So we've already broken down some of these players that are low key winning in free agency, even though they didn't go anywhere. But there's always a flip side. What about some players who are going to see their fantasy stock take a dive because of what's gone on? So here we go with some secret losers after the free agent period. Of course, still a lot will change after the draft, but right now, got to be down on these guys. And let's start with a player who I feel like can't catch a break. We always feel like Garrett Wilson is due for a monster season. He's so good, but the Jets offense it's just not geared towards his talents.
Not geared towards his talents. And what do? They go out and they sign Justin Fields. Of all the quarterbacks they could have gotten outside of maybe Daniel Jones, this might be the worst one for him. I mean, look, Justin Fields might help the offense overall because of what he brings with his legs. And maybe they can just play kind of like what we saw with the Steelers last year early in the season, right? Just don't make any mistakes, run the ball a lot and just win these low-scoring, ugly games, which might be good for the Jets, but it's not good for Garrett Wilson and for fantasy. And like you said, this is an extremely talented player who it just seems like every year just gets stuck either with bad quarterbacks or bad situation. And unfortunately, this looks like another year where it's going to be a bad quarterback and a bad situation for him, at least for fantasy. So I don't think I don't think people are going to drop Garrett Wilson down in the ADP as enough for me to feel comfortable drafting him. Like, I feel like they're going to see the name Garrett Wilson and he's still going to go like early second round. And I just think that's going to be too high for him in fantasy drafts this year. So I think it's just going to be another year where he's right around 1,000 yards, 5 to 6 touchdowns, which isn't terrible, but not really what we're looking for from Garrett Wilson.
Yeah, I think you phrased it perfectly. This is just not the right quarterback for him or for any what you would like to see elite receiver in fantasy. Justin Fields is not by far the worst quarterback out there. Not going to be the worst starting quarterback in the NFL next year, but it's not ideal for supporting a high-end wide receiver in fantasy. Because like you said, I think this just means they don't pass the ball quite as much. I think this is good for Brees Hall potentially, but I just think this is going to be another situation as we've talked about several times. It's like kind of like Terry McLaurin. The guy can't catch a break. How long is it going to be until he gets an elite QB? I guess we're still going to have to wait. And so that leads us to Chris Olave, who I guess we're just going to say the exact same thing. Like, I know there's going to be changes in New Orleans, but are these changes enough to really help Olave?
Yeah, this is another guy. I mean, look, these guys are very similar, right? They came into the draft at the same time. I don't want to say they're similar players, but they're both very talented wide receivers who have just been stuck with bad situations. I really had high hopes for Chris Olave this year, right? Kellen Moore coming in as head coach, like, okay, step one done. Now, step two, let's get Derek Carr out of here. But instead, Kellen Moore gives Derek Carr like the vote of confidence, like he's our guy. Like, oh man, I don't know if Kellen Moore is enough to overcome Derek Carr. Now, I will say the difference between Olave and Garrett Wilson is Garrett Wilson, like I said, is going to be an early second round pick because some players just have that name value where drafters can't help themselves. Chris Olave, you can currently get him in the 5th round, so maybe I'll still take some shots on Chris Olave, but this is a guy I was talking about, like, hey, I think he's going to be one of my must-draft players this year because they're going to do something at quarterback and they're going to improve quarterback, and he's got this new head coach, and it's going to be so much better in New Orleans, but I don't know if Kellen Moore is enough to overcome Derek Carr. Like, Olave will be fine again, like, kind of like what I said, Garrett Wilson, probably like 1,000 yards, 5 to 6 touchdowns, which is fine for fantasy. It's not like a bust or anything, but not the upside we were looking for or hoping for.
No, and before anybody steps in and says, well, but look, they haven't done anything at wide receiver, and all they did was re-sign Juwan Johnson at tight end. There's still going to be a lot of targets for him. He's still going to be the number one receiver. That's not any different. Like he's been the guy there. That's not the issue of having to share targets with some other elite receiver. It's not what we have been looking for. And also, I guarantee they're going to add somebody in the draft. They almost have to. So don't fool yourself into thinking that this year will be different because right now it looks very similar to how it's been. And what about a quarterback that needs a receiver on the flip side there? Drake May, a lot of people excited about his talent, as you should be, but you cannot be excited about what the Patriots, I guess, haven't done in free agency.
No, we really thought, okay, they're going to sign somebody, right? But T. Higgins gets franchise tag. Chris Godwin decides to go back to the Bucs. I guess the Patriots did offer him, allegedly, a lot of money, but he decided to go back to the Bucs. Now what's really out there? We're looking at Stephon Diggs, who's over 30 years old, coming off ACL. Cooper Kupp, who looked pretty dusty last year. Amari Cooper, who's over 30 years old and looks pretty dusty. I mean, Keenan Allen, who's over 30 years old. At least he was good and productive last year, but there's not a lot out there, for the Patriots. Now, sure, maybe they could do something in the draft, but first of all, what has their track record been drafting wide receivers? It's been horrendous for the most part. And second of all, this is not like a great wide receiver class. So I like Drake May. I thought this could be a big second year for him. I thought the Patriots would do something at wide receiver, get him some help. So far, they've done nothing. I mean, Mac Hollins, look, Mac Hollins is cool. He walks around barefoot in the snow or whatever, but it's not really going to help Drake May for fantasy. So I think Drake May probably going to be very similar to how he was last year. That's going to be, he'll have some weeks where he's great, he'll have some weeks where he's terrible. Good luck guessing when they are.
Yeah, we have to remember that the Patriots are in this position because they drafted receivers last year and they did not pan out. I think we can pretty easily just slap the bust label on them. Maybe something changes in year two, but again, they wouldn't be so desperate looking for help if either of those guys at least even showed some promise. And there's not really somebody that I feel like is going to come in on day one and help, even if they happen to take a receiver with their very first draft pick. And so, yeah, the promises of T. Higgins, Chris Godwin, somebody like that coming in to help. No, but honestly, I'll just say I kind of had Drake May as a loser as soon as they decided to go with Vrabel as head coach. This is going to be a conservative offense. I don't think it's going to be great for the passing game anyways. And so without an elite wideout, which they definitely aren't going to get, and I think I'm going to have to wait another year before I even look at him in fantasy. And speaking of Chris Godwin, he's staying there in Tampa, which means Jalen McMillan is not going to be the number 2 guy there. And maybe what we saw toward the end of last season doesn't carry forward.
Yep, this is a guy, again, I thought Jalen McMillan was one of the best values in fantasy drafts. You could typically get him like in the mid-70s pick, and I'm like, why? Why are we doing this? There's a chance that Jalen McMillan is going to go into 2025 as the wide receiver 2 behind Mike Evans. But of course, that's not going to happen with Chris Godwin re-signing. Now, I will say at least, Godwin may not be ready week 1, may not be 100% to start the season, but look, what's more important? Like, getting, the first 4 weeks of good Jalen McMillan and then not much the rest of the season, or like last year where you get him towards the end. It's always way more important to get him towards the end. So I still like Jalen McMillan. I still think he's a talented player, but now he's going to be sharing targets with Godwin and Mike Evans. I just think he's going to be a very volatile guy. He'll have those moments. He'll have those weeks where he catches a 30-yard touchdown or whatever it is, but he'll probably also have more weeks where he does a whole lot of nothing.
Yeah, and again, we're not saying completely avoid Jalen McMillan like he's worthless in fantasy, but you got to realize he's the number 3 and probably a pretty distant number 3 behind guys like Evans and Godwin. And this is great for Baker Mayfield. We already said that, but yeah, this can't be good because he was going to potentially, jump up huge in terms of value and in draft stock. But now you got to consider that he's taken a step back. And some people will just conveniently forget that, oh, yeah, Chris Godwin wasn't there when McMillan was putting up those numbers last year. It's not going to be the same. Trust me. Sometimes a whole offense can suffer because of its team's front office decisions. And in this case, I think we have to look at every receiver or anybody who's capable of catching a pass in the Colts offense. It's either Anthony Richardson or Daniel Jones. Pick your poison.
This is like, no, thank you. Can I what's behind option C? Is there an option C? Like, what's behind the mystery box? Oh man, this is terrible. Again, Pittman was another guy I was talking about. Like, it's crazy to me. Michael Pittman going outside the top 100 picks. Like, this is insane. Like, come on, this is insane. And then they go out and they decide they're going to have a competition between Anthony Richardson and Daniel Jones. I mean, does it even matter who wins this competition for fantasy? I mean, maybe it matters, like, at least Anthony Richardson, if he wins, maybe you can, stream Anthony Richardson as a quarterback, but it doesn't matter for the pass catchers, Josh Downs, Michael Pittman, any hope of a Donnie Mitchell year 2 breakout. I mean, it's gone now because we're either going to be looking at AR or Daniel Jones. This is terrible. I'll probably still take shots on Michael Pittman outside the top 100 because let's be real. How good does Michael Pittman really need to be when he's going outside the top 100? But man, any chance of him being like a league winner at that pick is probably gone.
This is just so frustrating because they actually have talented wide receivers like Josh Downs, a legitimate passing quarterback, could be a target hog. I mean, he could be like a Khalil Shakir type in terms of production. I think she's actually a little bit better than Shakir. AD Mitchell, they drafted him early just to what, suffer through this? And then Pittman, it's just kind of depressing. But honestly, if there is no option number three, which at this point I don't know what it is Joe Flacco available? Maybe still. I just have to pass on all of these guys. And at the running back position, you know what happens sometimes a player lands in a spot that is bad for both him and the player that was already there. And it looks like that's what's going on in Carolina. Chuba Hubbard is now joined by Rico Dowdle, who is going to be either competing for touches with him or maybe just sitting behind him. How do you see this playing out?
I mean, you got to think this is more of a split. I mean, look, Chuba Hubbard was good last year, no doubt about it, but Miles Sanders was not. I mean, Miles Sanders, like the 2 years in Carolina, was absolutely terrible. They already, released him and haven't even heard a sniff of any team being interested in him. But Rico Dowdle was good last year, and now this is legit competition for Chuba Hubbard. And don't forget, Jonathan Brooks, although, yes, he did tear his ACL for the second time, at some point probably will be back this year, and they probably will want to get him involved since he was, a high-end draft pick last year for them. So, look, Chuba Hubbard last year prior to that injury was legitimately was a league winner in fantasy, but now with Rico Dowdle there, this is just a messy backfield that I think I'm probably just going to avoid.
Well, the frustrating thing here is that, like you said, Chuba Hubbard was so good down the stretch. And I understand every running back needs a capable backup because, as they know, injuries happen. And so it's not surprising that they got somebody, that it was a veteran. And Rico Dowdle isn't amazing. Let's not give him too much credit. I mean, he's capable backup. I still think this is more like a 1A, 1B situation. I still think Hubbard is draftable, but it's not as ideal as it would have been if it was somebody like an AJ Dillon or Cam Akers, a guy who isn't as big a threat to take touches. So I'm not out on Hubbard, but I am pretty out on Rico Dowdle. Although I will say this, I'll probably still have Rico Dowdle in my draft queue ahead of Javonte Williams. So there's some players who might secretly have lost the free agent period for fantasy. If you didn't catch our secret winners, it's right here.